Excellent. Okay, good morning. I'm conscious I've obviously got the lunchtime slot. I saw a lot of people trailing out there saying, I'm going to get some lunch, I think, now. But that's fine. So thanks very much for making the effort to miss lunch for another 10 minutes and have a listen to me. So I guess it says I'm going to talk about cyber threat intelligence. I am. I'm going to probably talk more about actual intelligence, hopefully. And by that, I kind of mean the context of military intelligence, kind of my background. So a bit more about that then, I suppose, I've just told you I'm not going to talk about CTI and then kind of here for CTI talk. So why, or who am I and why should you bother listening to me? So I spent a decade in the military doing intelligence work, lots of different roles, lots of different things. I probably spent over 6 months or so being trained in it directly, not because I'm slow, but because that's how much training they give you for it. And then since there, I like to say I exited via cyber, and that basically meant a bachelor's degree in cyber, CISPs and all sorts of other bits and pieces. And then left in 2016, since then, I've worked at loads of organisations. I spent a decade working at one organisation and then 8 years working at 9 or 10 different organisations. But yeah, it's been really good, really interesting. And I suppose the lessons and things I want to tell you about today have been born out of the past 18 or so years of seeing how, where and why people use intelligence and how they might do it better. So it's for practitioners to some extent. Obviously, you'll probably know more than I do because I'm not a practitioner in the field. But it's also for customers to kind of understand what and how they might use it better and how they might engage better. Okay, so a bit about the why then, from my perspective. So I think that cyber threat intelligence, when it's put forward, kind of comes like this. So the thing I care about, so when I came here today, I cared about whether or not it was raining or not. I wanted to know whether or not I needed to bring an umbrella, whether or not I need to wear a raincoat, whether or not I could drive, whether I could walk, whether it was going to be awful. Now, it feels sometimes like when I ask that of a CTI function, I get this. They say, you're interested in weather, you're interested in cyber. Okay, well, it could flood. There could be a deluge. There could be a firenado. It could be a tornado. It could be the end of days. Cyber, it's the end of days. I'm like, okay, well, all I care about is the specific day that I'm going to go to this thing. Is this likely? Is this going to happen? And this tends to be, again, not everywhere, not everyone, but it tends to be you get this kind of, horror story about what it is. When in reality, all I wanted to do was know what the weather was going to be like. So I need to think about where I want to get the information from, having a look through that information, and then understanding it so I can take an action on the back of it. So for this, a week out, I had a look at what the weather's going to be like. That's all I did. It's like, okay, well, I want to know what the weather's going to be like. I don't need a picture of a firenado. I just need to know what the weather's going to be. And then I just checked it again. I checked it again yesterday. Done. And that, to me, my requirement, answering my question, answering my RFI, answering the question I wanted to answer for that, it's done via that. So it's a really simple information request, and it's really simply answered. It doesn't require any, anything extravagant or exciting. No need to picture floods and things. It's just that. Okay, so, and as it says there, the intelligence side of it is the forecast. It's telling people what might happen or what has happened. So you can give people reports of what the weather might be like. You might want some contextual information about generally at the end of August in Bristol it's going to rain. But ultimately you actually want to know what it's going to be like on the day. So what actually affects your organisation and when it affects them. Okay then, a couple of brief asides, I suppose, to kind of give a bit of context with regard to terminology and specifics around things. So I'm really keen whenever I look at a subject to kind of see what it actually means. What does this subject actually mean? So I looked at the definitions of the words. These are from Crest and Bank of England, and they basically turn around and say, I'm going to start at the bottom. So intelligence, they say it's information. More on that later. It's probably not. Threat is something harmful, and cyber is computers or computer networks. So information about something bad that might affect computer networks. That to me makes sense. Okay, that sounds about what it is. Another, say, brief aside, just to kind of cover off some housekeeping, I guess, to some extent. This is the Crest pyramid as to how they define things. So they have strategic at the top, covering the most things. And then at the bottom, they have operational, basically the lower level, more tactical, what I'd refer to as tactical, which is exactly why I wanted to put the slide in, because for me, from a military context, I refer to tactical as the lowest level. And sometimes when you talk to other people, that confusion can make someone seem completely not credible immediately. So if you don't define that and ensure you're talking about the same thing at the same level, people say CTI function is useless, giving the wrong thing. That person doesn't know what they're talking about. They probably do because they've had the audacity to talk about it. So chances are they're just talking on a different background to you. So it's important that you talk about these things. So just to cover that off. So intelligence context, then we said there it was information. Well, you'll see here that information isn't the last piece of the puzzle on the slide. The last piece of the puzzle is intelligence. And you'll see here the words I've already used already, which is collection, processing, analysis, and dissemination. So going from a wider environment, getting some data, turning it and converting it through to information, and then disseminating and using intelligence to tell people and inform an action they might take. So that's the really important piece, is that it's not just all the information that's out there. It might be at times some quite, specific lower level information, but ultimately it's about giving something that's valuable that they can action against. It's known in this cycle. A lot of people around the community, I've been to a lot of talks. Some people slam this, some people rave about it. It's a very simple process, a very simple cycle. Some people say it's massively outdated, and it's no longer valid in the context because of the speed it moves at. I've used this cycle at, a very fast speed of real life, maybe not network speeds, but certainly it's usable. And I think the other point I'd make is that if this isn't valid, so I was fortunate enough last year to be able to do some analytics training, data analytics training with LSE, and they put forward this conceptual model for data analytics. And I was like, hang on a minute, that's exactly the same thing. And this is being taught as an analytics techniques for data, for the preparation work for AI, machine learning, whatever you want to call it. This is the foundation of that to do the analytics work behind it. So ultimately, it's the same thing. And I'm not to say that it doesn't require running at different speeds, there's different technologies involved in it, but ultimately, having a question and ending up with an answer is what you want to try and do. And having a structure to do that can be really helpful. So I'm going to canter through that process now and sort of talk through the different phases of it to give you an idea about what and how you might use it. As I said, it's as much around informing people who are consumers of it as it is maybe some practitioners who are maybe newer to the field. But either way, I think there's something to be gained from it. So direction-wise then, there's some initial considerations. So often it's referred to as like the area of responsibility, area of operations, area of intelligence responsibility, lots of things that the thing on the left is referred to. But ultimately, that's all your tech, where you operate, what you've got, and how you use it. It's the theme across all of cyber and infosec, whatever you want to call it, that basically you've got to know what you've got, because that's what things people care about. They always say things like, are we okay? Is my network safe? And what they mean when they're saying that is all that stuff that might be theirs. Okay, they don't mean all the stuff that's not theirs, that's outside of that. And they're the things on the right of the slide there, which effectively say, you've got things in the area of intelligence interests. So external actors, other organizations, other threats. The things you might report on that might affect the things inside the organization, but they're not the organization. Okay, so that's where the horror stories come from. They're the Firenados and things. Ultimately care about what happens on their network. And that's done through intelligence requirements. So they need to have a requirement or an information or question to enable them to understand what they care about. So there it says, it's doctrinally, it says a statement provides rationale priority for an intelligence activity and detail to allow CTI staff to answer the question, basically is what it's saying. How do we get enough information to effectively answer this question? Where do we get it from? And a lot of organizations I've worked for use that through priority intelligence requirements. Okay. They're called 1,000 different things at different organizations, but ultimately it's a series of questions. This is just a brief sample of them. I've got about 7 or 8 slides with these on, that talk about the things that as an organization you want to routinely answer as questions for your organization. So things there like, what reports have there been on vulnerable infrastructure for our organization? What recently disclosed major cyber disruption, attack, or vulnerability or exploit has the capability to impact our organization, but always about you and your network and your things, your technology, because that's the bit you actually care about and that's the bit you can actually have an effect on. Okay. So to answer the question, then you need sources, right? So Crest put forward that there's 12 categories of sources. And I'm not going to dwell on specifics of all of them, but ultimately they have defined that there are a number of sources you can get information from, number of sources you can use to enable you to answer questions. So things like the deep and dark web, things like, information from your own SIEM, things like messaging platforms, social media, you've got bits on there like code repos and stuff. There's lots of places you can get the information from, lots of different ways you can answer a question, but it's important you've got the question, you're mapping it to a source. So, okay, well, if I want to answer this kind of question, I'm going to go to this kind of source. And if I've been to that source and didn't get an answer, you can kind of say, well, there is no answer. And if you can do that, it gives you a lot more credibility when you're then briefing people to say, we've checked all the viable sources for this. There is no answer for it. Okay, great. Keep it on cover. Find out if you can find an answer in the future. And then finally, the last one they put forward is this information sharing platform. So they can be useful. Some people have got, negative things to say about them, but ultimately it's a good place where you might be able to get more of a refined answer and maybe share some of your information from your network as well, providing you've got it covered. A bit of a challenge there with regard to how much might get shared and how much people are sharing and using in there, but they're definitely useful information repositories. So that's direction. It's the biggest part, you'll be pleased to know, but ultimately you've got to get that bit right, because if you get that bit wrong, you're going in the wrong direction. Okay, so you need to be going in the right direction. So the next thing you need to do then is collect your bits and pieces together. You collect the information. So you've got your questions, you've got your sources, you need to collect everything you need to answer that question. And there are a number of processes, from my sort of background and training, whereby we do things like collection coordination, requirements management, information requirements management. Basically, you need to have a way of bringing all the information together, searching those databases, querying them, understanding what bits of data you want from what database. And this is where the speed bits often gets challenged, because it's like, well, there's too much out there. It's like, yeah, there is too much out there. You're right. Definitely too much out there. This is where your tooling comes in to enable you to do those things and to map to priorities, and the products you've got to produce and things. It's also an important point at the bottom there with regard to what you're collecting. So priority wise, 3 is enough, right? If it's outside of 3, you don't need it. You don't need it in your tip. You don't need to collect it, because if you're collecting it and it's not meeting any form of baseline requirement, you're basically just filling up and paying for storage and paying for compute. Don't do it. It's a bad move. But yeah, so ultimately that kind of mostly covers the collection. So once you've got your question, you've got your sources, you've collected the information for it, you're then going to process it. So it's a 5-stage process to process the information, and effectively it's bringing it all together. Again, a lot of this collation stuff now is done by machine, but ultimately you do need that to be encoded correctly to be done by a machine. Evaluation, there are some other slides I've not included here, but things like evaluating your sources is really important. Do you trust the sources? Is the information, is the source usually reliable? Is the information credible? There's lots of things you can kind of look at there, and you can grade sources and information against reliability and credibility. Again, it's not an exact science. It's kind of more of a guess, and it's an organizational specific thing. You then got to do your analysis. Again, the only bit in here, despite the fact that CTI practitioners are often called analysts, this is the only bit in the whole piece kind of talks about analysis. The skill set is much wider than just kind of, does this look true? Is this right? Or is this wrong? So it's important that you obviously have a wider view of these things. Integration, so bringing it together, going through that filter that I've put on there, and then effectively providing a so what factor. Okay, you've told me all these things. Okay, so it might be the case of you've told me about a fire NATO, but you can give me a reason why you've told me about a fire NATO, because actually there's predicted to be one here today. There's not one predicted to be here today. But, it might be the case, right? So once you've done all that work, all that good work, it's down to dissemination now. Okay, so getting the report out there, telling people what you need them to know. They're giving you questions. You've put sources together. You've processed information. Now you're telling them what you think they need to know on the back of that. There's a number of ways to put it out there. The key thing to understand and to recognize here is that the way you give the information back to people, it has to be how they want to receive it, not how you want to give it, which it sounds like an obvious thing, but ultimately you've got to answer the question how they want it answered. Now that's not mean you've got to give them the answer they want. It just means if they want it on a one slide to tell them what the problem is, you've got to kind of get it to one slide. If they want a tome of 10,000 words, then give it them. But I probably won't. And there's a couple of example types there. So it might be that you want to have a routine report that goes out, summarizing everything, or it might be there's just something really bad that's happened. And this is where, I'll turn around and say, you might just want to send out a tactical report. People go, what do you mean by a tactical report? An operational report, whatever you want to call it, at that lowest level. These are just bits of information that are really valuable to answer these types of questions and requirements. Okay, so that was a brief canter through the intelligence cycle, covering the direction, which I think is the most important phase of things. To get that right, make sure you know what questions you're asking, make sure you know how you're going to answer them, make sure you've got all the information together, and make sure you understand where you're going to get it from. So then you go and collect it from there. Once you've collected it together, you're then going to process it through that 5-stage process of filtering it through to understand exactly what you want, what answers you need from it. And then you're going to tell the customer, and ultimately there will be a customer. You shouldn't be just doing this for yourself. Tell the customer what they need to know. The questions you've agreed with them that they want answered, you're going to tell them what the answers are, or what you think the answers are. Okay, so some key takeaways then, from my perspective then. So, as I said there, you've got to have the direction phase. Without that, it's got to be collaborative, okay? You've got to work with operational teams. People who work in IT, believe it or not, you've got to talk to them, work out what the systems are. You've got to work out with executives what they care about. Everyone's got to be involved in this. Now, that doesn't mean they're all going to get in a room together, but it does mean they need to be informed, because ultimately, this is a function that's meant to be delivering some value. So it's got to be done that way. And that, I'm not saying that, pointing the finger at CTI and saying you've got to be more involved. I'm saying that to everyone. The whole organization's got to get involved in this, because it's no good just pointing the finger and saying no good. Unprocessed data information, that's not intelligence, although it'll often be termed it. So again, use of terminology is really, really important, because otherwise people look at it and go, you should give them a bunch of hashes. This isn't valuable. This isn't int. This is rubbish. Now, in reality, it's not. It is valuable to the right person. But the point is that you've got to have that, kind of contextualized. So that so what factor is really, really key. I mentioned it already in the talk, but it is somewhere between an art and a science. There's bits of it which are really technical. Whether or not you're using something like Jupyter, maybe you've got Python scripts running and stuff. Maybe you're scraping data off the web. There's lots of bits of it that are technical. There's also lots of bits of it that are kind of, what do I think about this? Is this likely or unlikely? Certainly at the strategic level, where you might turn around and say, we think that, this threat actor is going to do this in the future. We've got no idea really, potentially. So train, educate, discuss with people. Make sure they understand what it is you're trying to say to them, and what the function does. and how it does it. So as it says there, what does, so it means something different to different people. We talked about the pyramid, talked about the cycle, talked about, if you're operating at the most detailed level of operational and tactical, operating there is very different to someone who might write board packs of a strategic view of outlook for the next 5 years of what the company's going to face. So if you're not sure, ask and share your knowledge, because it means different things to different people. And then finally, just to close off, I suppose, on this, it is a team sport. I genuinely believe that CTI functions should be communicating across the organisation. Okay, if it has to be done through other people, do it. But ultimately, the worst thing that can happen is them, getting the function together and sitting in an office quietly on their own and just churning out reports. Someone going, these reports are rubbish, and them saying, the company don't understand what we do, or the customer doesn't understand what I do. Okay, well, work together, talk to each other, tell them what you're doing, explain why you can add value and how you can add value. And if they don't know what they're getting, go back to them to the start and say, do you have different questions? Is there something else you'd actually like to know? How can I help you answer your questions and work better with you? That's me. Thanks very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. I cantered through it quite quickly. It has been said to me before, do you actually breathe, Paul? I do. I can assure you I am breathing. This is not a facade. I am breathing. But yeah, thanks very much for your time. And we've got some time now, hopefully, for some questions, I think, if there are any. Yes?
So more of a technical question rather than a process one. Do you have any experience or any recommendations when it comes to indicator or threat intel sharing platform for use within the company? So, for example, one of the more popular open source products is MISP,
yeah,
and that one is a tough nut to crack when it comes to actually deploying and configuring it properly. So, do you have any experience with those platforms? Or?
So the main experience is people complaining they're no good, right? That's the main experience of is people saying this doesn't work. I think the real challenge is understanding what it is you want to ask of it. So, and actually understanding whether or not it can answer what you want it to ask. And if it can, and obviously delineating to some extent exactly what and how you're going to get from it. So treating it almost as a source and saying, this is just another source. What questions can it answer and how will it best answer them? And if it doesn't, I think what I've seen elsewhere as well is people just go and buy the tool first of all. Say, we've got the tip, we've got the tool, we've got the sources. Okay, great. What do you care about? Well, just the company, everything, the whole organization. So direct experience of integrating them in a better solution. Sorry, no. I think the key thing is critical thinking throughout the process to say, okay, does this thing actually do what we want it to do? Does it do what we expect it to do? Is it suitable for the requirement? And make sure you've got that requirement. Not the best answer I know, but hopefully it's answered some of your questions. Okay, thanks. And you just want to...
Yeah, so when cyber strategy is already quite difficult for some businesses to implement, are you seeing resistance to this kind of extra layer, or would you build that into that existing cyber strategy for business?
Yeah, so I think sometimes people see, great question again. So I think sometimes people see, there's two different schools of thought, I guess. Some people see it as the first thing you should do, which I think is probably the right thing in one context, but the wrong thing in another context. So i.e., you should definitely understand what questions you've got first, and you should also understand what's in that area of intelligence interest, i.e. who's targeting you, what you're doing, and how you're doing it. You should definitely have those bits in place. But yeah, I'd certainly agree that a lot of people say, well, do I even need this? That seems like the icing on the cake. I'm going to build do the cake first, and then afterwards we might get it if we need it in the future. Whereas I see it as that,
so outward looking part of the business, really, isn't it?
Exactly, and I think the other point as well is that you would scan the market before you engage with it. If you're going to try and sell something there, you would do it. So if you're going to put your entire system up on the network, which people have already done, or up on the internet, which people have already done, you probably want to know who's going to likely want to take it down. And I think a lot of the time people don't, and you end up with this scenario whereby so most of my roles have been like it's always termed intelligence led, and all organisations have got it on their website. We're intelligence led. It's like, okay, when you say that, what do you mean? Where's your intelligence function? Oh, we kind of mean we Google stuff before we go out and do stuff, and that's probably good enough, isn't it? It's like probably not intelligence led, but yeah, good question. Yes.
So this is actually a pretty good way of getting more resource, really.
I think so. So I'm an independent contractor. So yeah, ultimately, often I don't catch horror stories, but I say, look, do you understand the areas around your business? They're like, no, none of that. We don't do any of that. And you're like, okay, well, probably you should. The services I sell are GRC services. That's what I'd go out and do. But ultimately, it's kind of like, what are you trying to answer? So sometimes they'd be like, someone said you should have some login and monitoring in place. Do you think we should? It's like, I don't you care about the fact that someone might be on your network without you knowing? Do you know who might be targeting your network? Do you know you're actually in the transport sector, which is targeted by these organisations? Is it really? Yeah. Well, here's 20 examples of where they might be targeted. Not a horror story for them, but just to say, like, these things do happen. You should probably care about them. And those PIRs I put forward there, so I've got about 6 or 7 slides with them on. Often we'll say to organisations, say, do you care about these things? They're like, well, yeah, massively. It's like, again, what efforts have you taken to answer those questions? They're like, none really. And you're like, okay, probably start there. So yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.
Out of time. Thank you.